Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. Each day, we travel back to discover a pivotal moment that changed the world. These aren't just dates and facts. They're stories of courage, conflict, innovation, and consequence that still echo through our lives today. Are you ready to explore? Let's see what happened on this day in history.
This is the Daily History Chronicle, where we explore the moments that shaped our world and discover why they still matter today. I'm Richard Backus, publisher of University Teaching Edition, and every day I get to share a piece of history that I think you'll find as fascinating as I do. On March 15, 1917, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia signed a brief document aboard a railway car in the city of Pskov, ending 3 centuries of Romanov rule. The abdication was supposed to save Russia. Conservative members of the Duma, the nation's parliament, pushed for it. Army generals insisted on it. Even some of Nicholas's own relatives urged him to step down. They believed that removing the unpopular Tsar would allow them to crush the revolution in the streets, stabilize the government, and focus Russia's energy on winning World War I. 8 months later, the Bolsheviks seized power. 16 months after that, Nicholas and his entire family were executed in a basement. The very people who engineered his abdication, moderate conservatives trying to preserve order, had instead unleashed chaos. And here's what fascinates me about this moment. Everyone involved was acting rationally. The generals weren't wrong that Nicholas had become a liability. The Duma members weren't wrong that something had to change. Nicholas himself wasn't wrong to recognize he'd lost control. Understanding what happened requires holding multiple truths. The Tsar was genuinely inadequate in the face of Russia's crisis. The people pushing for his removal genuinely believed they were saving their country, and their well-intentioned solution destroyed everything they were trying to preserve. Picture this. It's past midnight on March 15, 1917. Nicholas II sits in his private railway car, stranded on the tracks at Pskov, about 150 miles south of Petrograd, the Russian capital. He's trying to return to the capital, where riots have been raging for days, but revolutionaries have blocked the rail lines. The Tsar is effectively a prisoner, though no one has formally arrested him. 2 members of the Duma arrive, Alexander Guchkov and Vasily Shulgin. They've traveled through the chaos to deliver a message Nicholas already knows is coming. Army Chief of Staff General Mikhail Alexeyev has been collecting telegrams all day from commanders at the front. Every single one says the same thing. The Tsar must abdicate. Nicholas has spent the day in his rail car receiving these messages. His own generals, the men he'd counted on to remain loyal, have abandoned him. The document is brief. Nicholas renounces the throne in favor of himself and his son, naming his brother Grand Duke Michael as successor. It's signed at 11:40 p.m., though Nicholas backdates it to 3 p.m. to make the decision seem less coerced. The next day, Michael will refuse to accept the throne unless a democratic assembly asks him to take it, which of course never happens. The Romanov dynasty, which has ruled Russia since 1613, ends not with revolution breaking down palace gates, but with moderate conservatives deciding their Tsar has become too much of a problem. Let me build the clock for you. Nicholas became emperor in 1894, when his father, Alexander III, died unexpectedly. Nicholas was 26 and completely unprepared. His father had been a towering autocrat who never thought to train his son for the throne. Nicholas once wrote in his diary, "I am not prepared to be Tsar. I never wanted to become one." But Nicholas desperately wanted to be a good Tsar in his father's image. He believed in autocracy not as a political theory, but as a sacred duty. Russia had been ruled by autocrats for centuries. The Tsar answered only to God. Any limitation on that power seemed to Nicholas like a betrayal of his ancestors and his duty. The problem was that Russia in 1894 was not the same Russia as in 1694. Industrialization was creating an urban working class. Universities were producing educated professionals who wanted a voice in government. Even the nobility increasingly saw autocracy as outdated. When revolution erupted in 1905 after Russia's humiliating defeat in the Russo-Japanese War, Nicholas was forced to grant a constitution and create the Duma, Russia's first parliament. But Nicholas never accepted these reforms as legitimate. He saw them as temporary concessions extracted under duress. Whenever possible, he undermined the Duma and ruled through emergency decrees. Then came World War I. In August 1914, Russia entered the war against Germany and Austria-Hungary with enthusiasm and confidence. That confidence evaporated quickly. The Russian army suffered catastrophic defeats. By early 1917, Russia had lost approximately 1.7 million soldiers killed, nearly 5 million wounded, and 2.5 million missing or captured. The economy was collapsing. Food shortages gripped the cities. The railway system, overburdened by military demands, was breaking down. In February 1917, what started as bread riots by women in Petrograd's bread lines exploded into revolution when garrison troops refused to fire on the crowds and instead joined them. Nicholas made what he thought was a decisive move in 1915. He went to the front to take personal command of the army. His advisors nearly all told him this was a terrible idea, and they were right on every count. Taking command achieved nothing militarily. Nicholas had no talent as a strategist, and mostly irritated his generals by interfering in their work. But now, every defeat was his defeat. Every casualty became his responsibility. And leaving Petrograd put his German-born wife, Alexandra, effectively in charge at home. The Tsarina was deeply unpopular. Many Russians suspected her of being a German spy, though she wasn't. But she was under the influence of Grigory Rasputin, the Siberian mystic she believed could heal her hemophiliac son. Rasputin was barely literate, but wielded tremendous influence over government appointments. The aristocracy was appalled. When nobles finally assassinated Rasputin in December 1916, many hoped it would restore sanity to the government. It didn't. Alexandra continued to push Nicholas toward increasingly erratic decisions. By February 1917, Russia was disintegrating. The army's desertion rate ran at 34,000 per month. Workers were striking, soldiers were mutinying. And the moderate conservatives, the generals, the Duma leadership, the responsible nobles, looked at Nicholas and saw disaster. They weren't revolutionaries. They didn't want to tear down the monarchy. They wanted to save it. And the way to save it, they believed, was to remove the weak czar and replace him with someone competent. Here's what troubles me. These men weren't wrong in their analysis. Nicholas was genuinely failing. His refusal to delegate authority, his reliance on Alexandra's advice, and his inability to work with the Duma, all of this was making the crisis worse. General Alexeyev, who orchestrated the abdication, was one of Russia's most capable military leaders. He wasn't a schemer, he was desperate. The Duma members who pushed Nicholas to step down included Pavel Milyukov and Alexander Guchkov, both liberals who'd spent years trying to reform Russia constitutionally. These were the moderates, the reasonable people, but they made a catastrophic miscalculation. They thought removing Nicholas would satisfy the revolution. They thought they could then form a stable, provisional government that would keep Russia in the war and gradually transition toward a constitutional monarchy, or perhaps a republic. What they didn't understand, what they couldn't see, was that Nicholas's abdication wouldn't stabilize anything. It would remove the keystone from an already crumbling arch. The provisional government that formed after Nicholas's abdication was filled with competent, well-meaning people. Prince Georgy Lvov, the first prime minister, was a progressive aristocrat dedicated to reform. But the provisional government had no real authority. It had no mandate from the people. Alongside it, the Petrograd Soviet, a council of workers and soldiers, claimed to represent the masses. These two bodies competed for power while agreeing on almost nothing except that Russia should stay in the war. The war was an impossible problem. The revolutionaries on the streets wanted peace. The soldiers at the front wanted to go home. The provisional government and the moderate conservatives knew that withdrawing from the war would betray Russia's allies and leave Russia vulnerable. But as they continued fighting every week, the government lost more legitimacy. The Bolsheviks, still a marginal group in March 1917, had a simple, powerful message: peace, land, and bread. By October, that message had won. Vladimir Lenin returned to Russia in April 1917 in a sealed train provided by Germany, which correctly calculated that Lenin would take Russia out of the war. Lenin and the Bolsheviks seized power in October 1917, which they called the October Revolution, but what was really a coup against the weak provisional government. In March 1918, Lenin signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which surrendered vast Russian territories to Germany. In July 1918, as anti-Bolshevik white forces approached Yekaterinburg, where Nicholas and his family were imprisoned, the Bolsheviks executed all of them to prevent their rescue. The irony is overwhelming. The moderate conservatives who pushed Nicholas to abdicate were trying to prevent exactly this outcome. They wanted to save Russia from extremism. They wanted to preserve some form of legitimate government. They wanted to keep Russia fighting alongside Britain and France. Instead, their action opened the door to the Bolsheviks, who gave them terror, civil war, and 70 years of communist dictatorship. We're still living with the consequences. The Bolshevik Revolution reshaped the entire 20th century. It created the Soviet Union, which would face off against the West in the Cold War. It inspired communist movements worldwide. It led to Stalin's purges, the gulags, and the Ukrainian famine. The moderate reformers of March 1917 couldn't see any of this coming, but their failure to see it doesn't make the results any less catastrophic. I find myself thinking about General Alexeyev's position. He had dedicated his life to serving Russia. He was watching his country collapse. The Tsar he served was clearly incapable of managing the crisis. What was Alexeyev supposed to do? Support a failing leader out of loyalty and watch Russia disintegrate? Or push for change and hope for the best? He chose change. It was a reasonable choice. It destroyed everything. Or consider Nicholas himself. He wasn't a monster. His diaries reveal a loving father, a man who played with his children and worried about their hemophiliac son. He genuinely believed he was doing his duty by maintaining autocratic rule. When he finally agreed to abdicate, it was partly for a personal reason. His son Alexei was chronically ill with hemophilia, and Nicholas couldn't bear to separate from the boy by abdicating only for himself. So he abdicated for both himself and his son, naming his brother instead. It was a father's decision made in an impossible moment. This is where history gets complicated in ways we often don't want to acknowledge. Nicholas was a bad czar for the moment Russia faced. His stubborn commitment to autocracy, his poor judgment, and his reliance on Alexandra and Rasputin all contributed to the disaster. But he was also a human being, trapped in a role he never wanted, trying to fulfill duties he'd been taught were sacred. The people who removed him were patriots acting to save their country, but their action made everything worse. The philosopher Edmund Burke, reflecting on the French Revolution, wrote that rage and frenzy will pull down more in half an hour than prudence, deliberation, and foresight can build up in 100 years. The moderate conservatives of March 1917 thought they were being prudent. They thought they were the grown-ups in the room, making hard but necessary decisions. They didn't realize they were pulling down everything they hoped to preserve. I'm Richard Backus, and this is the Daily History Chronicle. Tomorrow, we'll explore another moment that shaped our world. Until then, think about this. When do efforts to save a failing system actually accelerate its collapse? How do we know when we're being prudent reformers and when we're just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic? And how often do the people trying hardest to prevent disaster become the very ones who ensure it? Because that's what March 15th, 1917 teaches us. Not just about the fall of the Romanovs, but about the dangers of assuming we understand where our actions will lead. Nicholas was inadequate. His removal was rational. The moderates who engineered it were patriots. And their well-intentioned solution unleashed catastrophe. All four of those things are true. And that's the kind of truth that history keeps teaching us, whether we're ready to learn it or not. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this episode, then please subscribe. If you really enjoyed it, then please tell a friend. I hope you will join me again tomorrow for more of our shared history.